Hellscreen is definitely one of the more unique FPS games I've played in recent memory, but should you buy it, and is it worth its $26 early access price tag? Let's talk about it. Released on March the 9th, 2023, Hellscreen is an indie first-person shooter that's being developed by a solo developer by the name of Jamie Deegan, who has over a decade worth of experience in the field of environment and VFX artistry. Hellscreen represents Jamie's first attempt at a commercial independent video game release, and he's put his heart and soul into Hellscreen for a number of years. Hellscreen takes you on a journey through a harsh digital hellscape after accidentally being misplaced from heaven, and now it's your goal to destroy the Hellscreen machine, an ancient device left by dead gods to determine who ascends to heaven and who falls to hell. But to put it simply, Hellscreen is basically just an FPS collectathon. Each map is going to have 2 of these soul cores and 6 soul shards you need to collect in order to unlock the doors to the following levels, with you needing 15 in total to enter the final level. Now, to make this game a collectathon with a visual style so jarring and noisy is an interesting decision in my opinion.
Oh my gosh, what do I do?
So right off the bat, Hellscreen's visual style is either gonna make or break the game for you. Its visual style is something that originally drew me to the game, and some of these levels are beautiful to look at with some really astounding landmarks, and I love it when games do something different, especially in the case of boomer shooters, because there are just so many on the market right now that they've almost all become a clone of one another, sporting the same loadouts, same art style, and they all seem to follow the same premise. Me go forward, me shoot monster. So nowadays it's refreshing to see a developer put a twist on their game to separate themselves from the crowd somehow. Whether it be something as simple as having a unique visual art style, or something a little more mechanically engaging, what draws my attention to a game these days is how it separates itself from its competitors, and that's exactly what Hellscreen did with its unique, glitchy, digital art style that immediately grabs your attention. Now, like I said, for some people this might be a little off-putting, which is completely understandable, but if the color scheme is too much for you, you can turn down the saturation in the settings. I love Hellscreen's art style and color scheme, but for a collectathon it can become a little visually crowded, which can lead to you getting lost, at least in my experience anyway. Some of these soul cores are pretty difficult to find, and I found myself getting misplaced and disorientated a lot, which just led to me getting confused and frustrated, and there were a few times where I just closed the game because I became too impatient. But that could entirely be a me problem. I had no issue with seeing the enemies, which is something I was worried about, but thankfully everything is in a shade of red or has some form of audio cue, so I found the combat to be overall pretty okay. Speaking of which, let's talk about the gameplay. Now, Hellscreen's combat, although fun to a degree, seems to feel like an afterthought, which sounds weird to say considering this is an FPS title, but I feel like this game should have fully committed to one side of the equation instead of trying to make them both work. And what I mean by that is, I often felt like I could just skip right past the enemies and collect the soul shards, then leave. Other than some very specific areas where you'll need to kill a few things in order to proceed, there really isn't much need to fight at all, which is a real shame because this game has a cool gimmick of giving you a rear view mirror which you can switch to on the fly, allowing you to shoot behind you without turning around. Moving forward also offers double damage, and moving forwards while shooting backwards gives you quad damage. You'll also run into a few enemies that can only be seen and damaged through your rear view mirror, and some secrets can only be seen through it. So it's just begging to have an engaging combat loop full of mechanical depth and player skill gap, but unfortunately that engagement just isn't there for me. Now, I have no idea when it comes to game development, but I know what I like and I know what I don't like. And I feel like Hellscreen would have been a lot more engaging if it stuck to just being an action FPS title and fully committed to balancing the enemy numbers as well as adding more types, a bigger arsenal, more bosses, etc, etc. You get the idea. There doesn't seem to be a lot of action and the fights just aren't very difficult either. And that's made even more apparent due to the fact there isn't any difficulty setting. At least not in my case anyway. The menus seem to bug out on me a bit, so there may very well be an option to adjust it. It kills me to say all this because I really don't like giving negative reviews, especially about indie games, but I just personally couldn't find a real reason to fight. None of these enemies were a real threat, with most of them being completely stationary, shooting at you from a distance with slow projectiles that are easy to dodge. You do have these spider things that constantly run at you, but they get put down very easily. Other than the spider things, there are no real threats in this game, which is just astounding to me because imagine the pressure and engagement you'd feel if you constantly had enemies to deal with. And what really stops this game's pacing dead in its tracks is the fact that once you kill everything, that's it. Nothing else spawns. So if you're still bumming around looking for soul shards, you'll just be wandering mindlessly through an empty map. I'm just confused about what kind of game this is trying to be, and it sucks because there is so much potential here. I kept going back to this game just hoping there's something I'm missing, but I just don't get it. I've been left feeling confused about what I just played. I will say that Hellscreen has one of the best shotguns in any video game though.
Maximum overdrive! Hi-ya!
Overall, Hellscreen felt like a confused game that needed to pick a side or balance the combination of combat and collecting. Maybe if there was more pressure to fight by adding an enemy killed counter, you could add massive rooms where you're fighting off waves and waves of enemies in order to proceed, make enemies guard specific items, and you could even add mini bosses. But as it stands right now, I personally found no reason to engage in combat other than the very few times where I had to. The enemy designs are cool, but there is no real threat or challenge to any of them. The maps can become confusing and disorientating, which can lead to frustration. The visuals and sound design are really cool and are easily my favorite part about this game, but ultimately it fell short in too many areas for me to sing it praise. The menu isn't finished with a lot of accessibility options not even being available. There are a few bugs, but none I feel that are worth mentioning. The performance isn't great either, and there were times where I dropped below 30 FPS, which would drastically impact your fire rate for some reason. And overall, the game just wasn't engaging enough to hold my attention long enough in order to complete it.
I did end up completing it, and my opinion hasn't changed. The last fight is definitely the best part of the game, but it's still very underwhelming. This game can be completed in less than 2 hours.
So should you buy Hellscreen? Well, I'm not going to tell you what to do with your money, but in its current state, I just can't recommend it. Even if you're someone like me that loves boomer shooters. It is still in early access, so many things can change, but with a $26 price tag, I'm gonna recommend you wait until some things are added and balanced. I'm still very much invested in this game, and I'll be keeping a close eye on its development, but overall I'm confused and disappointed in what I've played so far.